The diplomatic vessel moved through space like a silver needle threading through black fabric. Inside, Hyun-woo stood at the observation window and watched the massive Valkyrie station grow larger with each passing moment. His hands were steady, but his heart beat faster than he wanted to admit. This was humanity's first real chance to sit at the table with one of the galaxy's oldest civilizations. Captain Dae-young walked up beside him and placed a hand on his shoulder. The older man had seen 3 wars and 2 first contacts in his career. He knew what fear looked like when someone tried to hide it. "You ready for this?" he asked quietly. Hyun-woo nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." "Did you read the latest cultural brief Dr. Ji-won sent over? The one that was 50 pages long?" "I skimmed it." Dae-young smiled, but the humor didn't quite reach his eyes. "Listen, just remember what we practiced. Keep your eyes down, bow at exactly 45 degrees, and, for the love of everything, don't try to shake anyone's hand. They find physical contact from strangers offensive." "I remember." Hyun-woo had memorized every rule, every custom, every tiny detail that might make the difference between success and disaster. The Valkyrie had been watching humanity for decades. They'd seen Earth's wars, its struggles, its small victories in the vastness of space. And, now, for reasons no one fully understood, they'd invited humans to talk. The docking procedure took another 20 minutes. When the airlock finally opened, Hyun-woo followed Captain Dae-young and Dr. Ji-won into a corridor that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of crystal. Lights moved through the walls like captured stars. Everything was perfect, symmetrical, and somehow cold despite its beauty. Their Valkyrie guide didn't introduce himself. He simply gestured for them to follow and began walking. His skin had a faint purple tint that reminded Hyun-woo of twilight. The guide's movements were smooth and efficient, without any wasted motion. It was like watching a machine that looked like a person. They entered a massive hall that made Hyun-woo's breath catch in his throat. The ceiling disappeared into darkness high above them. Hundreds of Valkyrie stood in perfect formations on either side of a long walkway. Every single one of them looked at the humans with the same neutral expression. Curious but distant, like scientists observing interesting insects. At the far end of the hall, on a raised platform, sat figures that could only be the imperial family. Even from this distance, Hyun-woo could see they were different from the others. They wore robes that seemed to shift colors with every breath. And, in front of them, standing alone, was someone who made Hyun-woo forget every rule he'd memorized. She was younger than the others, or at least appeared to be. Her skin had that same purple tint, but it was lighter, almost luminescent. Her eyes were pure silver without any visible pupil. Her hair, if it could be called hair, floated around her head like she was underwater. She wore simpler clothing than the others, just a white robe that fell to the floor. This had to be Princess Era. The intelligence reports had mentioned her, though they'd included more questions than answers. Youngest daughter of the Emperor. Unmarried, which was apparently unusual. Interested in alien cultures, which was considered odd by Valkyrie standards. Captain Dae-young began the formal greeting. His pronunciation of the Valkyrie words was careful and slow. Hyun-woo stood slightly behind him, eyes properly lowered, doing everything exactly as he'd been taught. But, then, something went wrong. Hyun-woo felt someone watching him. Not the general observation of the crowd, but a specific, focused attention that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Without thinking, purely on human instinct, he looked up to see who it was. Princess Era was staring directly at him. Their eyes met across the distance of the hall. Hyun-woo realized his mistake immediately. Eye contact with Valkyrie royalty without permission was a serious breach of protocol. It could be seen as a challenge or an insult. He should look away right now, but something stopped him. The princess wasn't looking at him with anger or offense. She looked surprised, yes, but also something else. Interested, maybe. Or amused. The moment lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Then, Hyun-woo forced himself to look down at the floor. His face felt hot. He'd just potentially ruined humanity's best diplomatic opportunity because he couldn't follow a simple rule. The formal ceremony continued. The emperor spoke in Valkyrie, and a translator device rendered his words into Korean for the humans. He welcomed them to the empire. He spoke about the importance of understanding between civilizations. His voice was calm and measured, every word precisely chosen. It was a beautiful speech, but Hyun-woo barely heard it. He was too busy internally cursing his own stupidity. After the ceremony, there was a reception. The humans were led to a smaller room where Valkyrie nobles could approach and speak with them if they chose. Dr. Ji-won was already deep in conversation with what appeared to be a Valkyrie scientist. Captain Dae-young stood stiffly, clearly uncomfortable but hiding it well. Hyun-woo tried to make himself invisible in a corner. He studied the other guests, noting their behaviors and interactions. The Valkyrie moved like dancers in a choreographed performance. Every gesture seemed to have meaning. Every word was carefully weighed before being spoken. There was no laughter, no raised voices, nothing that suggested emotion beyond mild interest. Then, the crowd suddenly parted. Princess Era was walking directly toward him. Every Valkyrie eye in the room turned to watch. The ambient conversation stopped. Hyun-woo felt his throat go dry. This was it. She was going to publicly reprimand him for his breach of protocol. It would be diplomatic, polite, and absolutely devastating to the mission. She stopped in front of him, close enough that he could see the silver in her eyes was actually thousands of tiny fractals, moving and shifting like mercury. Up close, she was smaller than he'd thought, barely reaching his shoulder. But, the way she held herself made her seem much larger. "You are the linguistic specialist," she said in perfect Korean. Her voice was musical, with harmonics that human vocal cords couldn't produce. "Yes, Your Highness. I am Hyun-woo. I apologize for your translation device malfunction earlier," she interrupted. "During the greeting ceremony. I heard what you meant to say, and I heard what the device actually transmitted." Hyun-woo's mind raced. He hadn't noticed any malfunction. What had his translator said wrong? Era tilted her head slightly, studying him. "You meant to think that I had eyes like starlight." A pleasant sentiment, if somewhat predictable. "But, what your device transmitted was that I have eyes like the death of stars." The room seemed to hold its breath. Hyun-woo felt sweat on his palms. That phrase sounded terrible. Violent. Absolutely the wrong thing to say to a princess. "I am so deeply sorry, Your Highness. That is not at all what I intended." Then, she did something that shocked everyone in the room. She laughed. It wasn't a polite chuckle or a brief acknowledgement of humor. It was a real laugh, clear and bright, that echoed off the crystal walls. Several Valkyrie actually stepped back in surprise. Apparently, princesses didn't laugh. Or maybe Valkyrie in general didn't laugh. Hyun-woo wasn't sure which would be stranger. "Do you know what that phrase means in our culture?" Era asked, her eyes still showing what might have been amusement. "To say someone has eyes like the death of stars is a compliment reserved for our greatest warriors and our most profound poets. It means you see both the beauty of destruction and the promise of what comes after. It means you see the truth of things, not just their surface." Hyun-woo opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no idea what to say. "No one has spoken to me with such refreshing ignorance in centuries," Era continued. "I find it delightful. Tell me, Hyun-woo, do you always say exactly the wrong thing at exactly the right time?" I try not to, Your Highness." "A pity." She turned to address the room, speaking in Valkyrie. The translator rendered her words, "I request that this human serve as my personal liaison for the duration of the cultural exchange." His unique perspective will be valuable. The other Valkyrie looked at each other in confusion. Captain De Young's face went pale. Dr. Ji-won stopped mid-sentence in her conversation. And, Hyun-woo stood there, wondering how a simple mistake had just changed everything. The next morning, Hyun-woo stood outside the princess's private quarters and wondered how his life had gotten so complicated so quickly. Captain De Young had spent 2 hours the previous night alternating between fury and panic. Dar. Ji-won had tried to explain that this was actually a great honor, but even she seemed worried. The truth was that no one really knew what Princess Era wanted from him. The door opened without him knocking. A Valkyrie servant, shorter than the others with darker purple skin, gestured for him to enter. The room beyond was not what Hyun-woo expected. He'd imagined something grand and formal, covered in jewels and expensive art. Instead, it looked almost bare. Simple furniture. A few scattered data tablets. And windows that showed the stars in every direction, making it feel like the room was floating in space itself. Princess Era sat by one of the windows, watching a distant nebula that glowed green and gold. She didn't turn when he entered. "Do you know how old I am, Hyun-woo?" He hadn't expected that question. "No, Your Highness. In your years, I would be approximately 243. She finally looked at him. "Still very young by our standards. Barely past childhood, some would say. And yet I am so tired of everything being the same." Hyun-woo didn't know what to say to that, so he stayed quiet. Sometimes listening was better than talking. "My people have achieved what others call perfection," Era continued. She stood and began walking around the room, her robe trailing behind her. "We have eliminated disease, poverty, and war. We have technology that other civilizations would consider miraculous. We have lived so long and learned so much that very few things surprise us anymore." She paused. "Do you understand what happens to a people when nothing surprises them? They stop growing." Hyun-woo offered carefully. "Worse. They stop caring." Era touched one of the windows, and the view changed to show Earth, that small blue marble floating in darkness. "Your people are different. You fight and struggle and fail constantly. You create beautiful things and terrible things, sometimes at the same time. You cry when you are happy and laugh when you are in pain. You are chaos given form. I'm not sure that's a compliment, Your Highness. It is the highest compliment I can give." She turned to face him fully. "That is why I asked for you specifically. I have been studying humanity for 17 of your years. I have watched your broadcasts, read your literature, analyzed your history. And I still cannot predict what you will do next. That is precious to someone like me." Hyun-woo felt uncomfortable under her intense gaze. "Why me specifically? There are better diplomats in our delegation. Smarter people. Because yesterday you made a mistake and didn't collapse from the shame of it. Because you looked at me when you were supposed to look away. Because you are imperfect and don't seem to hate yourself for it." Era moved closer. "Tell me something, Hyun-woo. Are you afraid of me?" He considered lying, then decided against it. "Yes, Your Highness." Terrified. She seemed pleased by this answer. "Good. Fear means respect. But also tell me, are you curious about me?" "Yes to that as well." "Then, we will learn from each other. Come, I want to show you something." She led him through corridors that twisted and turned in ways that made no logical sense. The Valkyrie station was huge, far bigger than it looked from outside. They passed other Valkyrie who all bowed to the princess but looked at Hyun-woo with expressions he couldn't read. Finally, they entered a garden that took his breath away. Plants from 1,000 worlds grew here under artificial sunlight. Some were familiar, earth flowers that must have been taken from old Earth colonies. Others were completely alien, with leaves that sang when the air moved and flowers that seemed to glow from within. Water flowed in streams that defied gravity, curving up and around in impossible patterns. I created this place, Era said with something that might have been pride in her voice. It took me 40 years. Every plant here is from a different world, chosen because it represents something unique about that civilization. This is how I have traveled without leaving the station. Through living things that carry the essence of their homes. Hyunwoo walked slowly through the garden, careful not to touch anything. It's beautiful. But lonely. Era knelt beside a small earth rose bush, red flowers blooming despite being millions of miles from their home planet. I can learn about these worlds, but I cannot truly know them. I can read about human emotion, but I cannot feel what you feel. That is the curse of my people. We have become so controlled, so perfect, that we have lost the ability to truly experience anything. You laughed yesterday, Hyunwoo pointed out. That seemed pretty real to me. Era looked surprised, then thoughtful. I did, didn't I? I haven't laughed in 70 years. It simply happened, without thought or intention. You caused that. I'm not sure if I should apologize or not. Don't. It was. She paused, searching for the right word, wonderful. Terrifying and wonderful. Like feeling a muscle you forgot existed suddenly, come back to life. They sat on a bench made of something that looked like stone but felt warm. For several minutes, neither spoke. Hyunwoo watched the impossible water streams and tried to process everything the princess had told him. She was using him for something, studying him, but it didn't feel manipulative. It felt desperate. There's going to be trouble, isn't there? He finally asked. With me being your liaison? Yes. Considerable trouble. Era didn't seem bothered by this. There is a faction among my people, led by Lord Velvar, who believe that younger civilizations should be absorbed into the empire for their own protection. They see humanity as dangerous children who might hurt themselves if left alone. And, what do you believe? I believe that my people are dying, and we're too proud to admit it. We have achieved immortality but forgotten why we wanted to live. We have perfect peace but nothing worth protecting. We need change, but change is the one thing we fear most. She looked at him with those silver eyes. Your people represent everything we are not. That makes you either our salvation or our destruction. Lord Velvar believes the latter. That's not ominous at all, Hyunwoo muttered. Era smiled slightly. You use humor to cope with stress. I have read about this but never witnessed it personally. It seems inefficient but oddly comforting. Welcome to being human. We're all about inefficient coping mechanisms. Teach me. The request was sudden and earnest. Teach me how to be like you. How to feel things without being consumed by them. How to make mistakes and continue forward. How to be imperfect and alive. Hyunwoo stared at her. This was an alien princess who had lived for over 2 centuries, asking him, a 28-year-old diplomat who still had student debt, to teach her how to be human. It was absurd. It was dangerous. It was probably going to end badly for both of them. Okay, he said. But, you have to teach me about your people too. Fair exchange. Fair exchange, Era agreed. She held out her hand in what was probably meant to be a human handshake. Her fingers were longer than his, cooler to the touch, and, when they made contact, he felt a small electric tingle. This is how you seal agreements, yes? Usually. Though we're probably breaking about a dozen of your cultural rules right now. Excellent. That seems appropriately human. She stood, pulling him up with surprising strength. Come, there is much to discuss. Lord Velvar will make his move soon, and we need to be prepared. He will try to prove that humanity is too dangerous to remain independent. We must prove otherwise. No pressure then, Hyunwoo said, but he followed her back through the garden. Behind them, the earth rose bush continued to bloom, the only flower from their shared world in a garden full of alien wonders. It seemed small and fragile among the strange glowing plants and singing leaves. But it was alive, and it was growing, and it had thorns that protected its beauty. Just like humanity itself, small and imperfect, but stubbornly refusing to simply fade away into the darkness of space. 3 weeks passed in a strange blur of cultural exchange and growing tension. Hyunwoo spent his days with Princess Era, teaching her about human customs while learning about the Valkyrie in return. He taught her about music, and she showed him mathematical equations that described the structure of consciousness itself. He explained why humans valued impermanent art like sand mandalas, and she revealed that the Valkyrie had once created similar things before they decided preservation was superior to creation. But, beneath these exchanges, something else was building. Lord Veldar appeared frequently at court, always watching, always accompanied by military officials who wore expressions of barely concealed contempt when they looked at the human delegation. Captain Dae-young reported increased surveillance on their quarters. Dar. Ji-won mentioned that several Valkyrie scientists had stopped meeting with her without explanation. Today, Era had invited Hyunwoo to attend a remembrance ceremony. It was one of the most sacred Valkyrie rituals, held once every lunar cycle to honor their ancestors. No outsider had ever been invited before. The ceremony hall was different from the grand reception room. This place felt ancient, with walls made of dark metal that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. Hundreds of Valkyrie filled the space, all dressed in black robes. They stood in perfect silence as the Emperor himself led the ritual. The Valkyrie had a unique relationship with death. They could live for thousands of years if they chose, but they could also choose to end their existence when they felt they had experienced enough. Those who made this choice were honored in these ceremonies. Their memories, perfectly preserved in digital form, were displayed for all to witness. Hyunwoo watched as one memory after another played on screens that floated in the air. A Valkyrie scientist who had studied exotic matter for 900 years. A poet who had written in languages that no longer existed. A warrior who had defended their borders before the Valkyrie had evolved beyond the need for violence. Each memory was crystal clear, every detail perfectly preserved. It should have been moving. It should have been beautiful. But, something about it felt empty to Hyunwoo. These weren't memories as humans understood them. They were recordings, data, information without the messy emotional weight that made human memories meaningful. After the ceremony ended, Era found him in the crowd. "What did you think?" she asked quietly. "It was impressive," Hyunwoo said carefully. "Your people's technology is incredible. To preserve consciousness like that, but..." Era prompted. She had learned to read his expressions well enough to know when he was holding something back. But it felt like visiting a museum, not honoring the dead. Like they were exhibits instead of people you once knew. Several Valkyrie nearby turned to stare at him. One elder, his skin so dark purple it was almost black, looked offended. But Era simply nodded slowly. "You see the problem then. We remember everything perfectly, so we feel no loss. And, without loss, what meaning does honor have?" Before Hyunwoo could respond, a commotion at the entrance drew everyone's attention. Lord Veldar strode into the ceremony hall with a group of officials behind him. He moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing and expected no resistance. "Your Highness," Veldar said, bowing slightly to Era but keeping his silver eyes on Hyunwoo. "How appropriate that we discuss the future during a ceremony honoring the past. I come with a proposal from the military council." Era's expression didn't change, but Hyunwoo noticed her hands clench slightly. "This is not the time or place for political discussions, Lord Veldar. On the contrary, it is the perfect time." Veldar addressed the crowd now, his voice carrying easily through the silent hall. "We honor those who chose to end their existence because they had seen all they wished to see. They made that choice from a position of wisdom and completeness. But, what of species who lack such wisdom? Species who rush forward blindly, who destroy and create in equal measure, who pose a risk not only to themselves but to the carefully maintained peace of the galaxy. He was talking about humanity. Everyone in the room knew it. The Military Council proposes that Earth and its colonies be granted protectorate status under the Valkyrie Empire. We would guide them, educate them, help them avoid the countless mistakes that young civilizations inevitably make. In time, perhaps in a few thousand years, they might be ready for true independence. The room erupted in quiet discussion. To humans, it would have barely registered as conversation, but, for the Valkyrie, this level of open debate was unusual. Hyun-woo felt his stomach drop. This was it. The move Era had warned him about. Veldar was making his play to absorb humanity into the Empire, and he was doing it publicly, in a way that would be difficult to refuse. Era stepped forward. Lord Veldar, you overstep your authority. The Council does not have the right to, the Council has every right to ensure the safety of the Empire, Veldar interrupted smoothly. And, the human presence poses questions that must be answered. For instance, Princess, why have you spent so much time with this particular human? What has he offered you that you cannot find among your own people? The question hung in the air like a blade. Hyun-woo saw the trap immediately. If Era defended him, she would appear compromised, proving Veldar's point that humans were dangerously influential. If she didn't defend him, she would be abandoning the very principles she'd been fighting for. He has offered me nothing, Era said clearly. I have learned from him, as I have learned from many teachers throughout my life. His perspective as a representative of humanity has been valuable in understanding their culture. Valuable? Veldar smiled, and it was not a kind expression. Valuable enough to laugh in public? Valuable enough to walk in gardens holding hands like mated pairs? Valuable enough to attend our most sacred ceremonies? Murmurs spread through the crowd. Hyun-woo's face burned. Someone had been watching them, reporting on their interactions, twisting innocent moments into something inappropriate. The Emperor finally spoke, his voice cutting through the noise like a knife through silk. Princess Era, is what Lord Veldar suggests true? Have you formed an inappropriate attachment to this human? Era stood perfectly still. Hyun-woo could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. She was weighing options, considering responses, trying to find a path that wouldn't destroy everything she'd been working toward. Then, she did something that surprised everyone, including Hyun-woo. She turned to face him directly and spoke in Korean, not Valkyrie. Hyun-woo, I am going to ask you a question, and I need you to answer with complete honesty, regardless of the consequences. Do you trust me? Yes, he answered without hesitation. It was true. Somewhere in the past 3 weeks, he'd come to trust this strange alien princess who laughed like it hurt and asked questions that had no easy answers. Then, answer me this, for everyone to hear, what is the difference between your people and mine? Hyun-woo understood what she was doing. She was giving him a platform, letting him make the case for humanity in a way that she couldn't. It was risky. If he said the wrong thing, he would prove Veldar's point. But, if he said nothing, he would prove it anyway. He took a breath and switched to Valkyrie so everyone could understand. His pronunciation was imperfect, but Dr. Ji-won had been teaching him. The difference is simple. Humans die. Not eventually, not as a choice after thousands of years, but quickly. We get maybe 100 years if we're lucky. We know from the moment we're born that our time is limited, and that knowledge shapes everything we do. You speak of your weakness as if it were strength, Veldar said dismissively. It is strength. Hyun-woo felt the words coming faster now, passion overriding his fear. Because we die, every moment matters. Because we forget, every memory is precious. Because we make mistakes, every success means something. You honor your dead by preserving them perfectly, but we honor ours by carrying them imperfectly in our hearts. We tell stories that change each time we tell them. We remember things that never quite happened the way we think they did. And, yes, it's messy and inaccurate and completely human. He pulled something from his pocket, the item he'd brought to show Era earlier. It was a photograph, old-fashioned and printed on actual paper. The edges were worn from handling. The colors had faded slightly. It showed his family, his mother, his father, his younger sister, all smiling at a beach somewhere on Earth. "This is my family," Hyun-woo said, holding it up. "This photograph is 30 years old. It's not perfect. The colors are wrong. Some details are blurred. But, when I look at it, I don't just see data. I feel something. I remember the sound of waves and the taste of salt air and my sister laughing at a joke I can't even remember anymore. You see a flawed recording. I see proof that I was loved." Era reached out and touched the photograph gently, as if it might crumble. "May I?" she asked. He handed it to her. She stared at it for a long moment, her silver eyes reflecting the faded colors. Then, something impossible happened. A single tear rolled down her face. The room gasped. Veldar actually stepped back in shock. Valkyrie didn't cry. They had evolved past that particular emotional response millennia ago. It was considered primitive, unnecessary, a biological function with no purpose. But, Princess Era was crying. Just one tear, tracking slowly down her purple-tinted skin, but undeniably real. "This is what I have learned from humans," Era said, her voice steady despite the tear. "I have learned that perfection is a cage. That immortality without purpose is just slow death. That remembering everything means treasuring nothing." She looked at her father. "Our people are not dying because we are threatened from outside. We are dying because we have forgotten how to live." The Emperor looked at his daughter, at the tear on her face, at the photograph in her hand. For the first time in the ceremony, his perfect composure cracked slightly. "You have changed," he said softly. "Yes," Era agreed. "And, that is not contamination, father. It is growth." The days following the ceremony were tense in ways that Hyun-woo couldn't fully understand but could definitely feel. The Valkyrie court had descended into something that might have been chaos by their standards but looked like quiet disagreement to human eyes. Nobles who had once moved in perfect synchronization now stood in small groups, having hushed conversations that stopped whenever anyone approached. Hyun-woo had been confined to his quarters for 3 days. Not arrested exactly, but strongly encouraged to remain where he was for his own safety. Captain Dae-young visited once, looking older than Hyun-woo had ever seen him, and told him that Earth's government was preparing for the worst. If the Valkyrie decided to declare humanity a protectorate, there was little Earth could do to stop them. The technology gap was simply too large. On the 4th day, Era came to see him. She arrived without announcement, sweeping past the guards at his door as if they didn't exist. She looked different. Tired, maybe, though he wasn't sure if Valkyrie could look tired. Her silver eyes seemed dimmer, and she moved without her usual grace. "They want to erase it," she said without preamble, standing in the middle of his small room. "The council has proposed that I undergo a correction procedure. They would remove the last few months from my memory, reset my emotional baseline, and ensure I return to acceptable parameters." Hyun-woo felt his blood run cold. "That's insane. You're a person, not a computer they can just reformat. To many of my people, there is no difference." Era sat down heavily in one of the human-style chairs they'd provided. It was too small for her frame, making her look awkward and vulnerable. "They believe I have been compromised by exposure to human emotionalism. Lord Veldar has been quite persuasive in presenting his case. He argues that my tears in the ceremony hall are proof that I am no longer fit to represent Valkyrie interests. What does your father think?" My father is caught between tradition and the truth he sees but doesn't want to acknowledge. He loves me, I think, in the way our people understand love. But, he also believes in order, in the systems that have kept our civilization stable for thousands of years. She looked at Hyun-woo with those strange eyes. He is afraid that if he allows me to continue changing, others will follow. And, if enough Valkyrie begin to change, what we are might cease to exist. Would that be so terrible? Hyun-woo asked quietly. To become something new? For them? Yes. Terrifying. We have been the same for so long that change feels like death. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. But, I have been communicating with others who feel as I do. Younger Valkyrie, mostly, those of us who have not yet fully settled into the eternal routine of our existence. There are more than I expected. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, scattered across our worlds. All of us feeling that something is missing, that we are incomplete despite our perfection. What do they want? They want what I want. To feel again. To risk again. To make mistakes and learn from them rather than simply accessing the collected wisdom of our ancestors. She turned to face him. You asked me once why I chose you specifically. The truth is that you reminded me of someone I used to be, before I learned to suppress it. Before I became what was expected of me. You made mistakes and survived them. You felt things intensely and didn't die from it. You showed me that it was possible to be vulnerable and still be strong. Hyun-woo didn't know what to say to that. The weight of what she was describing, the pressure of being what her people needed while betraying what they expected, seemed impossible to bear. There's going to be a hearing, Era continued. Lord Veldar has invoked an ancient law, the right of cultural testament. He's demanding that you publicly defend your actions and humanity's worthiness to remain independent. If you fail, the Council will vote to make Earth a protectorate. If you refuse to participate, the result will be the same. And, if I succeed, then, you save your people, and, maybe you help save mine as well. But, the odds are not favorable, Hyun-woo. Veldar is a master of rhetoric. He has had centuries to perfect his arguments. And, the Council is predisposed to agree with him because he offers them the comfort of maintaining the status quo. Hyun-woo paced the small room, mind racing. What exactly would I have to do in this hearing? Convince the Council that humanity's chaos is not a threat but a necessary force for growth. Prove that the changes happening to me and others like me are not corruption but evolution. Make them understand what I have only just begun to learn myself, that living requires the risk of pain. No pressure then, Hyun-woo muttered. Just save 2 civilizations with a speech. I believe you can do it. Era's voice was certain. You have already done something no Valkyrie has managed in 1,000 years. You made me laugh. You made me cry. You reminded me what it feels like to be genuinely uncertain about what happens next. If you can do that to someone like me, perhaps you can reach them as well. Over the next 2 days, Hyun-woo prepared. Dr. Ji-won brought him every piece of information she had on Valkyrie history, culture, and philosophy. Captain Dae-young offered advice on public speaking and staying calm under pressure. But, mostly, Hyun-woo sat alone and thought about what it meant to be human in a universe full of beings who had evolved beyond humanity's messy emotions. He thought about the photograph he'd shown the Council, now returned to him with the edges slightly more worn from Era's handling. He thought about his sister's laugh, his mother's cooking, his father's terrible jokes. He thought about every mistake he'd ever made and every time he'd managed to do something right despite the odds. The night before the hearing, Era visited him again. This time she brought something with her, a data crystal that glowed with soft blue light. This contains records from our early history, she explained. Before we achieved what we call perfection. When we were more like you. Emotional. Chaotic. Dangerously alive. She placed it in his hand. We don't teach this history anymore. We consider it embarrassing, a reminder of what we used to be before we evolved. But, I have studied it, and, I think you should too. Because the truth is that we weren't always perfect. We chose to become this way. And, now some of us are wondering if we chose wrong. Hyun-woo studied the crystal. Why are you giving this to me? Because tomorrow, Lord Veldar will argue that humanity is inherently dangerous and must be controlled. He will use our current perfection as proof that his way is right. But, if you show the council our own history, if you remind them that we too were once like you, then, perhaps they will remember what we lost in our pursuit of perfection. You're taking a huge risk sharing this with me. Yes. But, you taught me that risks are sometimes necessary. That playing it safe is just another form of dying slowly. She moved toward the door, then, paused. Hyun-woo, regardless of what happens tomorrow, thank you. For seeing me as someone who could change rather than someone who needed to be fixed. For treating my questions as legitimate rather than signs of malfunction. For being imperfectly, beautifully human in a way that reminded me what being alive actually means. After she left, Hyun-woo spent the entire night reviewing the data crystal. What he found there shocked him. The ancient Valkyrie had been passionate, creative, and, yes, violent. They had wars and, art and, love and, hate in equal measure. They created music that made no mathematical sense but, touched something deeper than logic. They wrote poetry that contradicted itself. They made mistakes and, learned and, grew. And, then, gradually, they had decided that all of that was inefficient. They had engineered themselves into perfection, removing the biological underpinnings of emotion bit by bit, generation by generation, until they achieved their current state of calm, logical immortality. They had succeeded so completely that they'd forgotten it had been a choice. As dawn broke over the station, artificial light replacing the darkness of space, Hyun-woo understood what he had to do. He couldn't just defend humanity. He had to help the Valkyrie remember who they used to be. The hearing room was packed when he arrived. Every seat was filled with Valkyrie nobles and officials. At the center sat the Emperor and Empress, flanked by the council members. Lord Veldar stood to one side, confident and composed. Princess Era sat in the audience, but, when their eyes met, she gave him the smallest nod of encouragement. Hyun-woo stepped forward into the speaking area, a small platform surrounded by hundreds of alien eyes, and, prepared to argue for the survival of his species by telling another species that they were already dying. The hearing chamber felt like standing inside a crystal geode. Every surface reflected light in ways that made Hyun-woo feel exposed from all angles. Hundreds of Valkyrie eyes watched him, silver and, unblinking, waiting to judge whether his species deserved to remain free or should be absorbed into their empire for its own protection. Lord Veldar spoke first. His voice was smooth, reasonable, and, utterly convincing. He laid out his case with the precision of someone who had argued it 1,000 times in his mind before bringing it to reality. The human species is at a critical juncture, Veldar began. They have achieved faster-than-light travel but, lack the wisdom to use it responsibly. Their history is marked by violence, environmental destruction, and, cycles of progress followed by regression. Left unchecked, they pose a risk not only to themselves but, to other developing civilizations they may encounter. The compassionate choice is to guide them, to protect them from their own worst impulses until they are ready for true independence. He presented data, charts showing human conflicts, ecological damage, technological setbacks. All of it was true. None of it looked good. Hyun-woo watched as the council members absorbed the information with small nods and, quiet discussion. Furthermore, Veldar continued, we have witnessed the effect human influence has had on Princess Era. A member of our royal family, someone who should exemplify Valkyrie ideals, has begun exhibiting emotional instability. She laughs without social context. She cries, something our people evolved beyond millennia ago. She forms attachments to beings she has only just met. If this is what happens after mere weeks of close contact, imagine what could happen if humans are allowed to spread their chaos throughout the galaxy. The chamber murmured in agreement. Hyun-woo saw several council members glance at Era with what might have been concern or pity. She sat perfectly still, her face showing nothing, but, he remembered her words, that she had hundreds of others like her, younger Valkyrie who felt the same suffocation she did. Then, it was Hyun-woo's turn to speak. He stepped forward, feeling the weight of two civilizations on his shoulders. His mouth was dry. His hands wanted to shake, but, he forced them still. He thought of his family's photograph, of Era's single tear, of everything that made humans human despite their flaws. Lord Veldar is right about almost everything he said, Hyun-woo began, and, the room seemed surprised by this admission. Humans are messy. We make terrible mistakes. We hurt each other and, ourselves. We destroy beautiful things out of fear or greed or simple stupidity. If you're looking for reasons why we shouldn't be trusted with independence, you'll find plenty. He saw Captain Dae-young in the audience looking worried. This wasn't how you were supposed to start a defense. But, Lord Veldar is wrong about what those flaws mean. He sees them as problems to be fixed, diseases to be cured. He looks at Princess Era's tears and, sees malfunction. I look at them and, see someone remembering how to be alive. Hyun-woo activated the data crystal Era had given him. Images filled the air around him, ancient Valkyrie history that most in the room had probably never seen. He showed them their ancestors, passionate and, chaotic, creating and, destroying in equal measure. This is what you used to be, Hyun-woo said. Before you engineered yourselves into perfection. Before you decided that emotions were inefficient and, mistakes were unacceptable. You were like us once. You felt things intensely. You made art that didn't make mathematical sense. You fell in love and, fell apart and, put yourselves back together differently than before. More images. Valkyrie poetry from 10,000 years ago, full of contradictions and, passion. Music that followed no logical pattern but, somehow moved the soul. Architecture that served no practical purpose except to be beautiful. And, then, you decided to become something else. You removed the biological basis for strong emotions. You extended your lifespans until death became optional. You achieved perfect recall, perfect logic, perfect order. You succeeded completely. Hyun-woo paused. So why does success feel so much like dying? That got their attention. Even Veldar looked slightly unsettled. Princess Era is not malfunctioning, Hyun-woo continued. She's evolving. Or maybe de-evolving, if you want to call it that. She's rediscovering parts of herself that your people decided to suppress thousands of years ago. And, she's not alone. There are others like her, younger Valkyrie who feel that something is missing from their perfect lives. They look at their immortality and, ask, what's the point of living forever if you're not really alive? The Empress suddenly, spoke, her voice cutting through the chamber. You speak of things you cannot understand, human. We chose our path carefully, over generations, with full knowledge of what we were sacrificing. We eliminated the chaos that held us back. Did you? Hyun-woo challenged, and, he knew he was taking a huge risk, but, he was too far in to back down now. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you eliminated everything that made life worth living. You don't create new art anymore, just variations on old themes. You don't explore with genuine curiosity, just catalog with detached efficiency. You don't form deep bonds because everyone is equally distant from everyone else. You call it perfection. I call it slow extinction. The room erupted in the Valkyrie equivalent of outrage, which was still quieter than a human conversation but, much more intense than their usual calm. Lord Veldar stepped forward, his composure cracking slightly. You dare suggest that our civilization, which has endured for over 50,000 years, is dying? We have achieved things your species cannot even imagine. We have conquered death itself. You've conquered everything except the question of why you bothered conquering it in the first place, Hyunwoo shot back. Your people live for thousands of years, but how many of them would say they're truly alive? How many wake up excited about what the day might bring? How many take risks just to see what happens? How many create something new instead of perfecting something old? He turned to address the entire council. You want to absorb humanity to protect us from our own chaos. But, what if we don't want protection? What if our chaos is what makes us strong? We die young by your standards, so we pack everything we can into the time we have. We forget things, so we value memories more deeply. We make mistakes, so we celebrate our successes. We're imperfect, so we keep trying to improve. That's not a disease. That's what being alive looks like. The Emperor leaned forward. And, what of the danger you pose? Your wars, your environmental destruction, your inability to agree even among yourselves on basic questions of governance. We're dangerous, Hyunwoo admitted freely. To ourselves most of all. But, we're also resilient. Every time we fall, we get back up. Every time we destroy something, we try to build something better in its place. Sometimes we fail. Sometimes we fail so badly it seems like we'll never recover. But, we do. Because humans are very good at surviving things we probably shouldn't survive. He thought of Earth's history. The wars, yes, but also the peace that followed. The environmental damage, yes, but also the massive efforts to heal it. The divisions, yes, but also the moments when humans came together despite their differences. You want us to be more like you, Hyunwoo said. Calm. Logical. Perfect. But, Princess Era wants to be more like us. Messy. Emotional. Alive. Which one of us is right? Maybe both. Maybe neither. But, the only way to find out is to let us try. He pulled out his family photograph, the one that had made Era cry. This is my family. This piece of paper is worth more to me than all your perfectly preserved digital memories. Because it's not perfect. Because it fades. Because someday I'll look at it and barely see their faces, and I'll cry at the loss, and that will hurt, and that hurt will prove that they mattered. That I mattered. That the time we had together meant something because it couldn't last forever. Era stood up from her seat. Several Valkyrie gasped. You weren't supposed to interrupt testimony, especially not if you were the subject of the testimony. Father, she said, addressing the Emperor directly. I need to say something. The Emperor looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Speak. Era walked to stand beside Hyunwoo. He saw that her hands were trembling slightly. I renounce my claim to succession, she said clearly. I request permission to travel to Earth as an ambassador, to learn from humans directly, to experience their culture fully, and to bring what I learn back to our people, not as a warning, but as a gift. The chamber exploded in chaos. This was unprecedented. A princess renouncing her claim was unheard of. Veldar looked triumphant, probably thinking this proved his point about human corruption. But, then, the Empress stood. She placed her hand on the Emperor's shoulder and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. I support our daughter's decision. Everyone froze. The Empress continued. I too have felt the weight of our eternal perfection. I have lived for 8,000 years, and I can barely remember the last time I felt truly surprised by anything. I watch our daughter laugh for the first time in decades, and I do not see malfunction. I see life. Raw and beautiful and terrifying. And I find myself envious of her courage. The Emperor looked at his wife, then at his daughter, then at Hyunwoo with his worn photograph and imperfect memories. For a long time, nobody spoke. Finally, the Emperor stood. The council will vote. But, before we do, I will say this, perhaps we have been so focused on preserving what we are that we have forgotten to question whether what we are is worth preserving. The vote took hours. Arguments were made, refuted, and made again. But, in the end, the decision was close but clear. Earth would remain independent. Princess Era would be allowed to travel there, accompanied by a group of younger Valkyrie who also wished to learn. In exchange, human scholars would come to Valkyrie worlds to teach and share their culture. As the hearing ended and the chamber began to empty, Era found Hyunwoo in the corridor outside. She looked exhausted but alive in a way he'd never seen before. "I'm coming to your world," she said, and there was joy in her voice. "I'm going to learn everything. How to laugh without worrying if it's appropriate. How to cry without seeing it as a weakness. How to make mistakes and survive them. Earth is going to seem very strange to you," Hyunwoo warned. "It's loud and messy and nothing runs on time." "I know. I can't wait." She smiled, and it was genuine and bright and slightly awkward, like she was still learning how the expression worked. "Thank you for reminding my people that we used to be alive. And for showing me that we could be again." 3 days later, Hyunwoo stood in the observation deck of the horizon's edge, watching Earth grow larger as they approached. Behind their ship, a small fleet of Valkyrie vessels followed, filled with young aliens who had decided that perfection was overrated and chaos might be worth experiencing. Era stood beside him, her hand in his, a gesture that Valkyrie reserved for family but that she'd learned meant something similar to humans. "Are your people going to accept me?" she asked. "An alien princess who cries at photographs and asks too many questions." Hyunwoo laughed. "We're humans. We specialize in accepting the impossible. We've had plenty of practice." "Then, teach me how to be impossible too," Era said, echoing the words she'd spoken weeks ago when this had all started. "I will," Hyunwoo promised. "And you can teach us how to be a little more perfect. Maybe between your chaos and our order, we'll find something that actually works. Or we'll make a spectacular mess of everything. That's the spirit. You're learning already." Behind them, both fleets moved together toward Earth, toward uncertainty, toward the possibility of something neither civilization could have achieved alone. It wouldn't be easy. There would be misunderstandings and conflicts and moments when both sides questioned whether this had been a terrible mistake. But there would also be laughter and tears and genuine surprises. There would be art that made no sense but touched something deep. There would be friendships that crossed the gulf between species. There would be growth, painful and necessary and real. And, in the end, maybe that was what being alive actually meant, not achieving perfection, but having the courage to remain beautifully, impossibly imperfect.